They sat there, the pillars of the British royal family, in a cold oak-paneled room. The news of the Queen's passing hadn't yet settled when the will was brought forth. With each word read aloud, the air in the room seemed to freeze. Not everyone was mentioned. Not everyone was treated as they expected. Some clenched their lips in restraint, others couldn't hide their fury. Some stayed silent, some seethed with bitterness. And in their eyes, there was not just the pain of losing a mother, a grandmother, but the shattering of trust of familial bonds and of the monarchy itself. Buckingham Palace was cloaked in a cold gray, as if the very skies of London were bowing to the passing of Queen Elizabeth II. Early autumn winds wove through the ancient stone columns, carrying the breath of an era now closed. Before the palace gates, a silent sea of people gathered, white bouquets lining the iron fences, mingled with old photographs and trembling, handwritten notes. "Thank you forever." The media, with cameras flashing relentlessly, tried to capture every moment of this historic juncture. But within the thick walls of the palace, no one was truly ready for what was to come. Charles stood before the grand window of the mirror room, his weary gaze sweeping over the crowd below. His hands clasped tightly behind his back, fingers interlocked as if to suppress a surge of emotion. He had waited his entire life for this moment, the crown, the throne, the responsibility of a king. But now that it was here, he felt only a chilling void. His mother, the woman who had shaped a century, was gone. And he, though well past 70, still felt like a boy standing before her stern gaze. Charles, a gentle voice came from behind. Camilla, dressed in an elegant dark green coat, stepped to his side. She placed a hand on her husband's shoulder, but her eyes remained fixed on the scene outside. They loved her. And they'll love you if you give them the chance. Charles pursed his lips, not responding immediately. Camilla always knew how to soothe him, but today her words of comfort seemed powerless against the fog clouding his mind. "I'm not sure I want to be loved, Camilla," he whispered. "I just want to do it right." A few rooms away, Princess Anne sat alone on a red velvet chair in the library room. Before her was a cold, untouched cup of tea. Anne didn't cry. She had never been one to let emotions spill over. But her hands, usually strong and resolute, trembled slightly as she held an old photograph, the Queen young riding a horse beside Anne on a misty morning in Balmoral. "Mother always said duty comes first," Anne murmured as if speaking to herself. But she never said it would weigh this much. Meanwhile, at Clarence, Windsor Castle stood imposing in the Thames Valley, its gray stone walls seeming to guard centuries of secrets. Today there was no sun. A thick veil of clouds blanketed the sky, as if nature itself held its breath for the moment, unfolding in the ancient meeting room of the royal family. The will of Queen Elizabeth II. The document that would shape the future of the monarchy was about to be revealed. Inside the oak room, the air was so heavy it felt like it could be sliced. The long oak table, polished over centuries, reflected the dim glow of crystal chandeliers. Charles sat at the head, his hands neatly placed on the table, but his fingers tapped faintly, a rare sign of unease. Camilla sat to his right, a pale green silk scarf around her neck like a fragile shield against the gazes directed her way. Anne opposite sat with her arms crossed, her sharp eyes scanning the room like a general, preparing for battle. William and Catherine sat side by side, their posture upright but not rigid, as if they had rehearsed maintaining a flawless facade in moments like this. No one mentioned Harry, but his absence was a raw wound, silently bleeding in each of their hearts. Catherine glanced briefly at the empty chair at the table's end, where Harry once sat during family meetings. She wondered what he was doing in Montecito, whether he was thinking of them, of his grandmother, of everything happening here. A soft knock broke the silence. A palace staff member entered, bowing respectfully before handing Charles a sealed envelope, its red wax bearing the royal crest. Charles took it, his fingers trembling slightly as they brushed the wax. "Thank you," he said, his voice low but betraying tension. The staff member left, leaving the family to face the moment they all anticipated and dreaded. Charles took a deep breath, preparing to break the seal, but a voice from the doorway stopped him. "Sorry, I'm late." All eyes turned to Prince Andrew. He strode in with confidence, his navy suit impeccably tailored, though the smile on his lips was strained. Andrew rarely appeared at such occasions anymore, not after the scandals that had pushed him to the margins of the royal family. Yet here he was, as if nothing had happened. "What are you doing here?" Andrew Ann spoke first, her voice sharp as a blade. Her eyes narrowed, not hiding her suspicion. Andrew didn't answer immediately. He pulled out a chair and sat with a casual ease that made William frown slightly. "I was invited," Andrew said, his tone calm, but tinged with arrogance. "More precisely, I was appointed." Charles looked up, his brows furrowing. "Appointed by whom?" Andrew smiled a smile that chilled the room by degrees. He pulled a small envelope from his pocket, also sealed with red wax, and placed it on the table. "By Mother. She requested that I read the will." Silence engulfed the room, heavy and almost suffocating. William leaned forward, his gaze sharp, as if trying to pierce through Andrew. "What are you talking about?" "This isn't a joke, Andrew." "William, I'm not joking," Andrew replied, his voice still calm, but his eyes scanned each person as if challenging them. "Mother wrote it clearly in this letter. I'm to read the will per her wishes." Catherine placed a hand on William's arm, a small gesture that stopped him from saying more. She studied Andrew, her gaze calm but piercing, as if trying to decode his intentions. In her mind, a question echoed. Why Andrew? Why would she choose him? Charles clenched his hands, his knuckles whitening. He wanted to object, to demand the letter be verified, but deep within, a small voice whispered that his mother never did anything without purpose. Elizabeth never acted carelessly. If she chose Andrew, there must be a reason, one he couldn't yet grasp. Anne, unlike Charles, didn't hide her outrage. "What is this game, Andrew?" she asked, her voice low but commanding. "Mother would never entrust something this important to you. Not after everything that's happened." Andrew shrugged, but his smile didn't waver. "Perhaps Mother thought I deserved a chance at redemption. Or maybe, Anne, she just wanted us to face each other, truly face each other." Camilla, silent until now, tilted her head slightly, her gaze shifting from Andrew to Charles. She said nothing, but her tightly pressed lips betrayed unease. She knew Andrew, his recklessness, his ability to stir trouble with a few words, and she feared not just for Charles, but for herself. Charles finally spoke, his voice low but firm. "Fine, Andrew. If this is Mother's wish, we'll honor it. But I warn you, don't turn this into a spectacle." Andrew nodded, but his eyes glinted with something, not joy, but satisfaction. He broke the wax seal on the large envelope, pulling out a thick stack of documents written in the neat script of a royal lawyer. The room fell silent, save for the rustle of paper, as Andrew turned the pages. When he began to read, his steady, deep voice resonated like a fateful drumbeat. "I, Elizabeth Alexandra Mary Windsor, as Queen of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth realms, leave these final words." Each word was a stone dropped into a still lake, stirring ripples no one in the room could predict. Catherine squeezed William's hand under the table, feeling his pulse quicken. Anne sat motionless, but her eyes churned as if bracing for a battle. Charles stared at the documents as if searching for his mother's shadow in the words. And Camilla, though outwardly composed, felt a growing unease in her heart. Love her or hate her, Elizabeth never acted without intent. And today, through Andrew, the least expected of all, she would force the family to confront the truth, each other and themselves. The oak room at Windsor Castle was gripped by silence, broken only by the steady voice of Prince Andrew, each word he read striking like a hammer against the centuries-old traditions of the monarchy. Light from the tall windows illuminated the documents in his hands, highlighting the carefully copied handwritten lines, the final wishes of Queen Elizabeth II. Every eye in the room, from Charles to Camilla, from Anne to William and Catherine, was fixed on him, but no one dared breathe too loudly, as if a single breath could bring everything crashing down. Andrew, his expression unshaken, turned to the next page of the will. The first provision, he began, his voice deep but clear. "Windsor Castle. The symbol of the monarchy will be transferred to King Charles III to continue its role as the heart of the royal family." A subtle wave of relief passed through the room. Charles gave a slight nod, his shoulders easing a fraction. Windsor Castle, where his mother had lived, worked and reigned, was a given. It was more than a castle. It was a symbol of power, of continuity. Camilla glanced at her husband, her gaze gentle but silent. She knew Charles had feared, if only for a moment, that his mother might do something unexpected. But this provision at least was what he anticipated. But Andrew didn't stop. He cleared his throat, a small gesture that made Anne narrow her eyes as if she sensed trouble brewing. The second provision, Andrew continued, his voice now carrying a slight emphasis, as if savoring the moment. The Sandringham estate, along with all its lands and assets, will be transferred to Princess Anne, the Princess Royal. The room seemed to lose all air. Anne, ever stoic, blinked in surprise, her hands freezing on the table. Sandringham, the place where the Queen retreated for Christmas, where the royal family sought peace amid media storms, now belonged to her. This was not just unexpected. It was a shock. Sandringham, by tradition, was reserved for the monarch or the heir to the throne. Giving it to Anne, who never sought the spotlight, was an unprecedented move. Charles clenched his hands, his knuckles whitening. A surge of wounded pride welled within him. Why Anne? He wondered, his gaze flickering to his sister, who sat still as if processing the news. Charles didn't doubt Anne's loyalty. She was the strongest in the family, always putting duty first. But Sandringham, it should have been his, or at least William's. He felt as though his mother, even in death, was testing him, reminding him that he had never truly met her expectations. William, beside Catherine, tilted his head, his eyes betraying surprise. He glanced at Anne, trying to read her reaction, but her face was a stone wall, revealing nothing save a strange glint in her eyes. Catherine, with her keen instincts, noticed it. She knew Anne wasn't easily swayed, but that fleeting look was a storm of inner turmoil. She squeezed William's hand lightly under the table, as if urging him to stay calm. The third provision, Andrew went on, his voice now tinged with solemnity, as if he too was surprised by what he was about to say. The Balmoral estate, along with all its assets, will be divided equally among all current members of the royal family: Charles, Anne, Andrew, Edward, William, and Harry. This time the silence in the room wasn't just heavy, it was stifling. Divide Balmoral equally. Never in the monarchy's centuries-long history had a property as significant as this been split in such a way. Balmoral was more than a retreat. It was the soul of the family, where the Queen found rare freedom, where family memories were woven through generations. Treating it like an ordinary asset to be divided was an unthinkable break from tradition. William felt his heart race. He remembered summer days at Balmoral when his grandmother taught him to fish by the River Dee, when she laughed heartily at his silly jokes. Balmoral was where he felt closest to her, and now the idea of it being carved up felt like losing a piece of himself. He glanced at Catherine, seeking comfort, but she only pressed her lips together, her gaze sharp, as if trying to fathom the Queen's deeper intent. Anne, the silent, felt a mix of emotions surge within her. Sandringham was already a major surprise, but Balmoral, sharing it with the entire family, including Andrew and Harry, made her wonder what her mother was thinking. She knew Elizabeth always had plans that outstripped anyone's vision, but this time she couldn't discern the purpose. A question echoed in her mind. Does Mother want us to unite or to clash? Charles, unlike Anne, couldn't hide his unease. He felt as though his mother was stripping away his control piece by piece. Windsor Castle was his, but Sandringham went to Anne, and now Balmoral was divided. He wondered if his mother truly trusted him, or was merely protecting the family from mistakes he might make. His wounded pride grew, but he couldn't let it show. Not now, not in front of everyone. Andrew turned to a new page, his eyes scanning the lines quickly before speaking, this time more slowly, as if weighing each word. The next provision, he said, his voice deep but clear, concerns the Vladimir tiara, the symbol of the future queen, along with a special message from my mother. The Vladimir tiara will be passed to Catherine, Duchess of Cambridge, with this message from my mother. Wear it with courage, as it has been worn through generations. A queen's power lies not in her crown, but in her heart for her country. The room fell into a moment of stillness, but not the stifling silence of before. It was a silence of reverence and acknowledgement that the Queen, even in death, was shaping the future. Catherine felt a surge of emotion, her hands trembling slightly under the table. She recalled her first meeting with the Queen, when the monarch gently placed a hand on her shoulder and said, "Catherine, you'll need more than grace to survive this world." Back then, she hadn't fully grasped the words, but now, with the Vladimir tiara entrusted to her, she felt the weight of that responsibility, daunting yet glorious. William turned to her, his eyes shimmering with a mix of pride and worry. He knew Catherine was strong, prepared for this role through years of dedication, but he also understood that the Vladimir tiara was more than a gift. It was a declaration that his mother and now his wife would be at the heart of a changing monarchy. "You okay?" he whispered, his voice soft but caring. Catherine nodded faintly, but inside a storm of emotions churned. She wasn't just receiving this crown for herself, but for Charlotte, for the next generation. And she knew that from now on, every eye would follow her, not just with admiration, but with scrutiny. Andrew, sensing the shift in the room's atmosphere, turned to the next page. "And one more provision," he said, his voice now tinged with surprise, as if he hadn't expected what he was about to read. "Regarding Princess Charlotte, my granddaughter, my mother requests that Charlotte be recognized in this will with this message: in the monarchy of the future, equality is not a choice but a responsibility. Charlotte, you will grow to shape this world as the women before you have done." This time the room seemed to stir awake. Charles frowned, his gaze shifting from Andrew to Catherine, as if trying to decipher his mother's intent. Anne, ever stoic, tilted her head, a subtle smile flickering on her lips. Camilla, though silent, felt a new wave of unease. But no one was more stunned than William and Catherine. Catherine felt her eyes sting, not from sadness, but from a blend of pride and responsibility. Charlotte, only 10 years old, with her radiant smile and curious eyes, had been named in the Queen's will, an unprecedented act. She recalled the times Charlotte sat with her grandmother listening to tales of royal history with fascination. "Granny, can I be a queen?" Charlotte had once asked, and the Queen, with a warm smile, replied, "You can be anything if you believe in yourself." Now that message was etched into the will, a promise for the future. Anne, always reserved, gave a slight nod, as if something clicked. She knew her mother never acted without purpose. Naming Charlotte, giving the Vladimir tiara to Catherine, was a clear message: women would no longer be mere shadows in the monarchy. And Anne, though never craving power, felt a renewed respect for her mother, who saw further into the future than anyone. Andrew cleared his throat, a small gesture that made Camilla tilt her head, her sharp eyes trying to anticipate what was coming. "The next provision," he said, his voice deep and deliberate, as if measuring each word, "concerns Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex." Harry's name, spoken in the quiet room, was like a lightning bolt. Charles clenched his jaw, his eyes darkening, as if the mere mention of his youngest son reopened an old wound. William sat up straighter, his gaze fixed, but his hand under the table tightened, as if suppressing a wave of emotion. Catherine, with her keen sensitivity, softened slightly, her eyes drifting to the empty chair at the table's end, where Harry should have been. Andrew, seemingly unfazed by the tension, continued with a formal tone. "My mother left Harry the ceremonial sword of King George Sinranis, given to her during the war years as a symbol of loyalty and duty. With it, this message: Harry, you have chosen your path, but your roots remain here. This sword is not for fighting, but to remind you of your duty to your family, your country, and yourself." The words barely settled before the room erupted. The sword of King George Sinranis. For Harry, Charles nearly roared, his voice trembling with rage. He shot to his feet, his hands slamming onto the table, making the oak surface quiver. "What was my mother thinking? Harry abandoned everything, family duty, all of it. And now she gives him a sacred symbol like that." "Charles, calm down," Anne said, her voice low, but sharp like a warning. But her eyes stayed on Andrew, as if trying to read his intentions. William, unlike his father, said nothing. He bowed his head lower, his eyes vacant, as if lost in memories of Harry, the days they ran through Balmoral's fields, the nights they whispered about dreams and fears. This sword, he knew, wasn't a gift, but a burden, a reminder of what Harry had left behind. A deep sadness settled in him, not just for Harry, but for their family, torn too far apart. Catherine squeezed his hand, her eyes full of empathy, but she didn't know how to ease his pain. "Utterly ridiculous," Charles went on, his voice now laced with bitterness. "If my mother wanted to remind Harry of duty, she should have done it when he was still here, not after he turned his back on us." He turned to Andrew, his eyes blazing. "What else, Andrew? Any provisions for those who truly deserve it, like Camilla, who stood by me through everything?" Charles's question halted the room. Camilla looked up, a flicker of surprise in her eyes, but she quickly lowered her gaze, hiding an inexpressible sadness. She hadn't expected to be named. She'd learned to accept her fragile place in the family, But Charles's public demand for her recognition touched her, even as it frightened her. Andrew, with a faint smile, flipped through the documents again, as if checking. Then he looked up, meeting Charles's gaze with a calm, cutting tone. "I'm afraid that's the final provision, Charles." Mother was clear, the will ends here. Andrew's words were a dagger. Charles stood frozen, his face flushed with fury. "Ends?" he repeated, his voice nearly a shout. "My mother left nothing for Camilla. Not a word, not a gift, not a shred of recognition. After all she's done, after all we've been through together." Camilla trembled slightly, her hands clenching in her lap. But she didn't look up. The sadness within her swelled like a wave, drowning any lingering hope. She'd known she wasn't universally loved, but she'd hoped just a little that the Queen, always fair, would offer her something. But nothing. Her silence in that moment was heavier than any words. Andrew stood folding the documents with a slow, almost deliberate motion. "I know this is a difficult day," he said, his tone tinged with insincerity. "But Mother made her choices, and we must respect them. I'll leave the documents with the lawyers to handle the details." Charles didn't respond. He turned and stormed out of the room, his footsteps heavy. The door to the oak room closed behind the last of the royal family, leaving a heavy silence, as if the room held on to unspoken words and unexpressed emotions. Windsor Castle, with its long corridors and towering portraits, seemed to watch them. Charles, Camilla, Anne, William, Catherine, each walking away with their own thoughts, carrying the weight of Queen Elizabeth II's will. Outside, the afternoon light faded, draping the green hills in a faint golden glow, signaling the end of an old era, though the new one remained shrouded in mystery. Camilla walked slowly beside Charles, her elegant gray coat unable to hide the exhaustion on her face. The meeting, with its shocking provisions and Charles's outburst, had left a void in her she couldn't name. She wasn't mentioned in the will, not a word, not a gift, not a hint of recognition. Though she'd braced herself for it, the absence cut deep. She'd come a long way from the woman scorned by the world to the one standing beside Charles as queen, though that title always felt fragile, like morning mist. But now, as Charles strode ahead, as if fleeing the events, Camilla felt adrift, like a shadow left behind. Charles, his shoulders rigid, entered his private study at Windsor, slamming the door before Camilla could catch up. His mother's will felt like a judgment on the reign he'd just begun. He'd waited his whole life for the throne, but now he felt like he stood on a cliff's edge, crushed by centuries of tradition and the world's expectations. Mother didn't trust me, he thought, pride mingling with fear. She thought I'd failed, that I needed Anne, Catherine, even Harry to keep this monarchy standing. He clenched his hands, his knuckles whitening, wondering if he could prove her wrong. In another room of the castle, William and Catherine sat across from each other on a green velvet sofa, the window's light casting shadows across their faces. William, his suit jacket unbuttoned, looked weary but resolute. Catherine, in an elegant beige dress, placed her hand on his, her gaze gentle but sharp. "We'll have to step up, Will," she said, her voice soft but firm. "The Vladimir tiara, the message for Charlotte. She placed her faith in us in the future." William nodded, but his eyes betrayed worry. He knew their roles, especially Catherine's, would now be more prominent than ever. The public would watch their every move, the media would dissect their every word, and the family, with its deepening cracks, would need them as an anchor. "I just want to do it right, Kate," he whispered, his voice faltering. "Like she did. But I'm not sure I can." Catherine smiled faintly, squeezing his hand. "We'll do it together," she said. And in that moment, they felt the weight of responsibility, but also the strength of partnership. Far away in Montecito, California, Harry stood on his home's balcony, the morning sun glinting off the letter. Not the sword itself, but a notice about King George III's ceremonial sword, yet it felt heavy as if he held it. He ran his finger over the royal lawyer's words, rereading his grandmother's message. "Your roots remain here." He remembered days at Balmoral when she taught him to tie fishing lines when she laughed at his silly jokes. But he also recalled the final days when he left, when the royal doors closed behind him. This sword, he knew, wasn't a gift, but a reminder of duty, family, and what he could never fully leave behind. "What do you want me to do?" he muttered, his gaze on the sparkling Pacific. His future lay here with Meghan and their children, but his roots, as she said, were still buried in British soil, tearing him apart. Anne, meanwhile, stood alone in Windsor Castle's garden, her dark green coat hugging her steadfast frame. She gazed at the meticulously tended flower beds, but her mind was elsewhere. Sandringham, the unexpected gift from her mother, was more than an estate. It was a responsibility, a sign that her mother saw something in her she'd never sought. Anne didn't crave power, didn't dream of crowns, but she never shied from duty. She understood a new era was dawning, one where she, though not seeking it, would play a vital role. She took a deep breath, her gaze sharp but calm, like a soldier preparing for a battle she knew she couldn't avoid. As dusk fell over London, Buckingham Palace stood resolute, its gray stone walls bathed in faint orange gold. From afar, it looked like an impregnable fortress, but within it held countless unspoken truths, secrets, conflicts, and intertwined fates. Charles faced the pressure of the crown. William and Catherine prepared for the spotlight. Harry wrestled with his roots. Anne stepped steadfastly into the new era, and Camilla silently carried the sorrow of a queen without a crown. The Queen's will, though read, was only the beginning of a longer, more complex, and more challenging story. Hit like, share, and subscribe to follow the gripping royal saga and never miss a twist.